Now, moving on to this political and social problems that are happening in the world. The world's attention for the past week until this Japan earthquake was focused on Libya and the problems in the Middle East, and especially in Saudi Arabia. So here's a story from BBC. Saudi police patrol Riyadh ahead of demonstrations. Hundreds of police have been deployed in the Saudi capital Riyadh ahead of anti-government rallies planned for after Friday prayers. Security forces have blocked roads and set up checkpoints, while reports suggest some protesters have begun to gather in the eastern town of Hofuf. On Thursday, police opened fire at a rally in the eastern city of Qatif, with at least one person being injured. Activists have been inspired by a wave of popular revolt across the region. Analysts have warned that any violence could have a big impact on global oil prices, and I couldn't agree more with this analysis. Unrest or civil war or revolution in Saudi Arabia will have a catastrophic effect on global oil prices, and it may be the straw that breaks the back of the global economy, leading to much, much worse problems. And here's another article on Saudi Arabia which says Saudi Arabia's regime will fall, says an analyst in Business Insider magazine. As Libya descends into full on civil war and protests spread across much of the Middle East, all eyes are focused on Saudi Arabia, which produces more than 10% of the world's oil. So far, protests in Saudi Arabia have been limited. But our guest, Fadel Ghaith, a managing director at Oppenheimer and Company, thinks that may soon change. The root cause of the Middle East unrest, Ghaith says, is inequality. Decades of autocratic rule have increased frustration that the vast wealth of the oil producing countries in the region is in the hands of a small, privileged few, and this frustration is finally boiling over. Although governments are making small concessions designed to quell this frustration, Ghaik believes the yearning of freedom and democracy is unstoppable. He says it is hard to predict whether the violence that consumed Libya will spread to Saudi Arabia and other countries, but he believes the protest will, and eventually he believes the regime will fall. Well, this gentleman is predicting that Saudi Arabia is going to fall. We'll just have to wait and see how things turn out. And the civil war in Libya is continuing. Gaddafi loyalists mount onslaught, and this is again from BBC News. Forces loyal to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi have made major gains against anti-government rebels, pushing them from two key areas. Western journalists in the city of Zawiya, west of Tripoli, confirmed the Gaddafi regime's claims that the city had fallen after days of bombardment. And rebels have fled from the oil port of Ras Lanuf in the east. Colonel Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, warned the rebel stronghold of Benghazi that government troops were on their way. That was the report about these problems that are continuing, and protests have been, known to be happening in Kuwait, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Jordan, and in other parts of the world as well. So this is not limited to just Libya and Saudi Arabia. Here's another story along the lines of the wars and terrorist attacks, etc. But this is not necessarily in the physical realm, it's more in the cyber realm. And this story goes cyber attacks hit Korean Defense Department US forces. And the story reads the websites of South Korea's key government agencies and financial institutions came under cyber attack for a second day Saturday, with few leads on who might be behind the attacks. The sites of the US forces in Korea and the Department of Unification, which handles relations with North Korea, were among those targeted by the distributed denial of service attacks. So, cyber attacks are one scenario that has been proposed as a game changing event for the whole world. It is interesting that this is the third report I've come across about major cyber attacks in recent days, in Canada first, and Korea, and now France. And here's the French story. Spectacular cyber attack hits French government. The French finance ministry has shut down 10,000 computers after a spectacular cyber attack from hackers using internet addresses in China, officials in a report said on Monday. The hackers were hunting for documents relating to the Group of 20 developed and developing nations, which this year is led by France, said Budget Minister Francois Barouin, adding that a probe was underway into the attacks. We have leads, Barouin told Europe One Radio, saying what he called a spectacular attack was probably the first time the French government's computer system had been hit on this scale. Yes, that story about the cyber attacks, I think, is going to play out in a big way when there will be some major attack on financial computers, possibly in New York or on the stock exchange or the Federal Reserve, etc. That is really going to, you know, bring the global economy to a crushing halt. Moving on to the food crisis, which has been developing for some time now, but it seems to be all the perfect storm, and then the food crisis seems to be brewing, and I think it is coming to a head real soon. And here's this Wall Street Journal article. It says food prices reach another record high. World food prices rose 2.2% in February from the previous month to a record peak, the United States nation's food body said Thursday, as it warned that volatility in oil markets could push prices even higher. Yes, prices have been rising at a rapid rate, especially in developing countries and third world countries like in India, which has been running almost like a 20% annual inflation rate in food. It is making life very, very difficult for the already malnourished population there and in many other parts of the world, including China. Then, warning of food price riots in the UK. Here's another story in the subject of food. A senior economist at the Worldwide Bank, HSBC, has warned of civil unrest in Britain if food prices continue to soar. Speaking on Jeff Rendell Live, senior global economist Karen Ward cautioned that the UK could experience the kind of food riots seen in other countries. Even in the developed world, I think we have very, very low wage growth. So people aren't getting more in their pay packet to compensate them for food and energy. And I think we could see social unrest, certainly in parts of the developed world and the UK as well. I would again have to agree with that, that food problems and food related social unrest will come to the developed nations, including the United States. This is a report from CNBC on the worldwide food crisis in 2011. Please give it a listen.
Everyone is talking about food riots. Every nation is doing something different to try to address the surge in food prices. Simon Hobbs takes us around the globe because this truly is a global story, Simon. Even though headlines are coming out of one or two countries, it's really everywhere.
Totally, Erin. Look, I want to show you just one day, the last 24 hours in the commodity crisis, and how policymakers around the world are battling in very different ways against surging food and commodity prices. And we'll kick off of course, with the latest shockwave starting here in the United States yesterday, when the Department of Agriculture slashed its estimate for harvests around the world because of drought in Argentina and terrible floods in Australia. That sent corn and soybean prices another 4% higher, with wheat gaining another 1%. Now, as daylight broke across the globe, so did waves of government decisions as prices continued to rise. In China, food inflation is already running at double digits. In fact, authorities have been running down state food stocks to keep a lid on local prices. Beijing have been planning to import millions of tons of grain from around the world. It was another reason behind the higher world prices. But today, China abruptly cancelled that plan to import. Next, South Korea unveiling measures to calm prices by reducing import tariffs on fish and powdered milk. Its central bank also surprised markets by ordering a 25 basis point hike in interest rates and ordered an immediate review of fuel prices in South Korea, basically to discourage local CEOs from hiking their prices. Now, as dawn continued to break across the world, in India, Fresh data showed food inflation there still running at almost 17%. Its authorities promising further measures, probably we think an outright ban on exports from India of all wheat and other commodities. Up in North Africa, Egypt, in order to avoid the sort of riots witnessed in neighbouring Algeria and Tunisia, its government today vowed to keep subsidising food prices and said it will find the resources from somewhere in order to do that. And in Europe, the head of the European Central Bank blaming rising energy costs for the fact that inflation in the Eurozone is running at 2.2%. The bank's president forecast prices would dip down below the target in the future, but if not, Jean-Claude Trichet left the 330 million people using the euro in absolutely no doubt tonight that they will face a hike in interest rates, and the euro has soared as a result. So, Erin, in just 24 hours, very different responses from subsidy to protectionism, from the blunt interest rate rises to trying to cajole the CEOs.
And you know what's interesting, and you talk about rates going up, and there's no short-term solution probably to this problem, and that's a painful one. I wanted to highlight, since you had this great map, just Africa overall. We picked out Sudan just as one place. We have a little bit of video of what goes on in Sudan. And guess what? It's not just Darfur. There's a lot of farming in Sudan, which is pretty incredible. Actually, one of the biggest places in the world for arable land and farming, livestock, sugar, you name it. And it's across Africa. Uganda, Mozambique, you need it. A lot of countries have obviously already been putting money into Africa to try to get out crops. But if you were to take advantage of that land, and we're not really doing that because of all the social unrest, et cetera, there really is land aplenty to feed the people on Earth.
You think?
Yes.
Wow.
There really is.
I think
now, whether we can actually do that and distribute it correctly, I mean, you look at a place like Sudan, everyone, I mean, it's the biggest country in Africa. There's only about 10 to 15% of the roads are even paved. So you may have the land, but actually getting the corn and the wheat
to the... It's suitable for agriculture.
Yes.
Well, that was a report from CNBC about the developing and fast escalating food crisis. And what I found interesting about this report was the anchor woman's contention that there is more than enough arable land in the world to comfortably produce enough food for all people that live on the planet. Now, I too believe that the earth generates enough resources to feed, clothe, and shelter everyone. No human being needs to suffer a lack on earth because of a lack of resources. The problem is not that the planet is running out of resources, but those who control the resources do not wish to share them with the masses, so they create the scepter of artificial scarcities. Their policies lead to malnourishment at best and outright starvation at worst for billions of people across the globe. And should not our righteous God avenge such wickedness, such mischief that results from the greed and selfishness of those who make our laws and control our resources? This is a verse of scripture from Isaiah chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right of the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless." This has been going on all through history, and it is getting worse and worse. The greed of man knows no bound, but our Lord God, the Lord of hosts, is coming with his army, and he is going to execute his vengeance. Watch out, he's coming. Lack of hunger and food will cause a lot of starvation, not just in some sub-Saharan African countries, but all around the globe. That which happened in Jerusalem in the siege of Nebuchadnezzar in the days of Jeremiah the prophet, when people measured food in ever decreasing quantity because it was so scarce. When hunger and starvation in the city led even to cannibalism, it is coming to the whole world. So the time to prepare is now. Tomorrow it will be too late. And you can read about this in Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 4, verse 16 and 17. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, behold, I will break the bread of staff in Jerusalem. The staff of bread in Jerusalem. And they shall eat bread by weight and with care. And they shall drink water by measure and with astonishment, that they may want bread and water, and be astonied one with another, and consume away for their iniquity. Yes, that is what is going to happen. That people are going to, right now, we don't have concerns about how much food we consume, but I believe that is going to change in a hurry in the near future.